ways, my friends, sunny ways.
It's been a year since the Liberals got that big majority in Ottawa. Time for an assessment then, so let's get right to it. Andrew is in Toronto, and tonight he's joined by Rosemary Barton, host of Power and Politics. Rosemary's in Ottawa. And Shachi Kurl, Executive Director of the Angus Reid Institute, joins us from Vancouver. So let's start with this. What's the most important promise that the Prime Minister has kept this year? And Andrew, why don't you kick it off?
Well, provisionally, arguably, I would say the carbon pricing initiative. I mean, there's a lot of work still to do, a lot of details still to be figured out. We're only sort of partway through it. But even to get as far as they have with that, to have taken the step of confronting the provinces that were reluctant to do this, they've gone much further than any previous government has gone on this file. And it's obviously one of surpassing importance. So that would be my nominee.
Shachi, what would you choose?
Two, actually. The first would be just a very quick promise, but one that has been particularly meaningful in the eyes of the electorate on being different, on doing government differently, on trying to be more open and transparent, and all of the things that had parliamentary press gallery reporters gushing in the first few months of that first year. But substantively, I would actually pick infrastructure, and it's not the sexiest topic, but it's one that is tangible for so many Canadians when you think about transit, roads, bridges, particularly in urban centres that returned a big mandate for the Liberals. And politically, it's smart too, because in 3 years, they'll be able to point to these things that were built or fixed and say, well, we did that. So easy to tick off the list, but also meaningful for people.
And Rosie, what stands out for you?
I actually think it's the child benefit. Remember, the last election was fought really about who could best help the middle class, however you define that, and it was broadly defined. But their big cornerstone promise was to try and help the middle class, and they did that by delivering on those childcare benefits. So 9 out of 10 Canadian families do get more money, tax-free money, than they got under the previous government. What they also did is that they said that people who were making more than $200,000 a year weren't going to get those benefits anymore. So they kept to their promise of not giving extra things to the wealthiest of Canadians and tried to push the money down to middle-class Canadians. And I think that's one of those things that people see in their bank accounts, and they're awfully happy to see.
So, Andrew, and why don't you kick off what is the most significant promise as yet unfulfilled?
Pretty clearly broke their promise on the deficit, and I think that's probably the biggest single one. They said the deficit was going to be $10 billion maximum. They said they were going to balance the budget in 4 years, and they said the debt-to-GDP ratio was going to continue to decline every year. None of those is any longer operative, as they used to say in Watergate days. It is, a major broken promise. It's not one that it seems that too many people are upset about, besides, grumps like me, but it is a major broken promise.
And Rosie?
It's sort of tangentially related. It's economic growth. The Bank of Canada yesterday revised economic growth down again. Today, coincidentally, Dominic Barton, who's their advisor on economic growth, came up with a bunch of ideas that he wants the government to do. But they are all things that are going to sort of take 2 years plus. And I think that the government's going to run into some political problems if we can't see, for instance, in this economic update at the beginning of November, some substantial moves on that front. How are they actually growing the economy? How are they actually getting Canadians jobs? I think that there's a long road ahead for them on that front, and I don't think we've seen enough movement in terms of what they promised.
And Shachi, what's been missing so far for you?
Well, I think it's less about what they haven't done and a little bit more about what they're choosing to focus on or prioritize right now. And I have to look at the electoral reform file with, more updates and confusion yesterday coming from the Prime Minister himself. This issue has been something of a muddle for this government. They came to power, said, well, we're going to make this change. They campaigned on it, didn't say what the change would be. And I think in the minds of a lot of Canadians who are frankly, not particularly engaged, pretty checked out on this issue and not able to find a lot of consensus around it, it does lead a little bit to questions of why this promise when there are so many other ones that have remained undone to this point, and why now? Especially
pull you into this because it was unclear this week if the Prime Minister was simply musing, thinking out loud, or whether he was planting the seeds for a walk back. What do you think?
I'm of two minds. If you just look at what he said on the surface, not a lot of it is untrue. It is the fact that probably that there's less public demand for reform than there might have been under Stephen Harper. That's probably true. And a lot of the other things he said, you can't really contradict it on the surface. But politicians don't say things for no reason typically, particularly skilled politicians, and I think we're learning Justin Trudeau is quite a skilled politician. So you could certainly read it as suggesting, well, you know, if the public doesn't really want to do this, then why should I have to do it? Or, you know, if we're going to do this, maybe we should only do a small reform because there isn't, you have to have much broader support for bigger reforms. You could start very easily to see agendas being read into it. And I guess the most disturbing thing was that when he was asked point blank by Tom Mulcair in the Houses of Parliament whether he was rowing back on this promise, he didn't really directly answer.
What's been your take on this, Rosie?
I think that there is no will to fulfill this promise in this government. I am perplexed as to why they made the promise in the first place, but I don't think that there is any will to do this. And I think there's a couple of reasons why. It's much more complicated than they thought. They probably can't get it done before the next election, and there's going to be no significant backlash if they don't go ahead and don't do it. I think they're walking away from it very, very quickly. However, I think they'll put other things in the window. They will take the report from Mac Méran, the outgoing Chief Electoral Office Commissioner, and they will put some practical changes in place. They will say, yeah, you can vote on the weekend, or yes, we will allow more days for voting. And then they'll be able to say to people, you know, we tooled with the election system, electoral system a bit to make it easier for you to vote, but we're not going to change the overall system because, as we keep hearing from the government, there is apparently no broad consensus that it be changed. How they define broad consensus, what they've done to get broad consensus, on that I don't know.
What the government has done, what it hasn't done, regardless, the numbers in the polls remain pretty enviably high for a government that's already a year into its mandate. Andrew, what do you read into that?
Well, partly it's the persona of the Prime Minister. He is personally popular. I might say some people are even infatuated with him. And he has a governing style, and his government generally, that suits the times. People are feeling relatively good about the country when they look around at some of the disarray in some of the other countries. And indeed, if the middle class were doing it nearly as badly as Justin Trudeau said during the last election, he probably wouldn't have been elected. This was a government that was elected by people who were feeling actually relatively good about their lot in life. But look, they've also, in the course of last year, they've made relatively few large mistakes. They've had relatively few scandals. They've had relatively few large broken promises, a lot of small ones. And over time, maybe some of those smaller things can build up. But after a year, I think people are feeling that, you know, they're reasonably steady hands in the tiller, and that's why they're enjoying such support. And of course, the last point is neither of the opposition parties have leaders.
Shachi, I see you nodding, and I'm wondering as well if this isn't a matter of circumstance. You know, people look south at what's happening there, and by contrast, anything here seems better.
Oh, absolutely. First of all, though, on this side of the border, long honeymoons are not unprecedented. Stephen Harper managed to keep his approval numbers well over 50% in the first year that he was in government, albeit a minority one. Jean Chrétien managed to keep his numbers well above that for 3 years. So, you know, what we can say, to Andrew's point, is that Canadians are feeling pretty loved up about this Prime Minister, but there is a serious relationship conversation that's going to be coming, because there is such a diversity of views in this country that it will be very hard to please everyone for as long as he has in the manner that he has as they start to get down to the business of governing. And to your point, Diana, what's maybe put that off, or what's maybe delayed it, is the fact that Canadians are so transfixed by the total dumpster fire that is the U.S. election and what's been going on south of the border. I think after November 8th, attention is going to come back to Ottawa. It's going to come back to this government. And one of the primary areas of focus is going to be on how Justin Trudeau actually manages a relationship with a new incoming president, be that who it will be, who won't be Barack Obama and who won't be talking about bromance, but will perhaps be talking about pipelines, about wanting a more advantageous deal for the U.S. on softwood lumber, talking about electricity exports and water exports.
Rosemary, how does the Prime Minister keep this momentum going?
I think his brand, his personal brand, as Andrew alluded to, is still his strongest asset. I think that Canadians like that he gets sort of worldwide attention and that people are talking about him, want to meet with him. He is able to attract, companies here. He's able to meet with people in a way we haven't seen before. So I think people like that. So he needs to keep his brand still popular and still present. I don't know, though, that he can sustain this that much longer. He is is consulting on a lot of decisions, but he's got a lot of big and contentious files that are coming down the pipe. Healthcare, for one, we saw this week. This is not going to go swimmingly at all. He's got a bunch of pipeline decisions he's going to have to sign off on as well. Those are inevitably going to upset some chunk of the population. So I don't know that this is really sustainable, but I continue to believe that he is the government's biggest asset right now.
But there's danger in that. Rosemary's absolutely right. And of course, the point of building up all that political capital is to spend it. And you're starting to see them spend it on things like healthcare, on carbon pricing. But there's a danger for them in having invested so much in the Prime Minister's personal brand. Yes, he's wildly popular now, but people can fall out of love as quickly as they fall in. And at some point, you know, if you get a different change in the economic climate or what have you, all those cute, funny things that people find attractive now could become very irritating in a hurry. So they've got to have a plan B if he's not so popular.
And Shachi, go ahead.
Usually, in order to fall out of love with someone, there's generally a third party waiting in the wings somewhere for you to turn your attention to. And from that perspective, look, the opposition is in disarray. They don't have those people to present to Canadians and say, hey, look over here. And even if and when they do, well, obviously, when they do get those leaders, the Conservatives still have an uphill battle trying to bring two segments of their right of centre flank together. And for the NDP, even with a new leader, they're going to have to find a way to unsqueeze themselves from the corner that the Liberals have actually put them in by employing some plays from the playbook of Trudeau the First and his then Principal Secretary Jim Coots, which was tilt left, out left the left, out NDP the NDP, and leave them no room to maneuver. So I don't know that things will substantially change. We might get more annoyed, or Canadians might get more annoyed with the Prime Minister over time, but I don't know that they're going to fall out of love. Those quirks just might start to feel annoying.
Well, as a report card, that's not too bad, speaking as a parent. So thank you all for weighing in.